Greetings, friends and fellow daemons, and welcome to another Daimonosophy. And yes, I'm doing another car video. I don't know. I felt drawn to it, so we're gonna try and do another car video here. Talk about some stuff. Talk about Kundalini, serpent power, and some of the ideas from Gopi Krishna that I've been doing a deep dive on here recently. One of the things that he talks about in his autobiography, Living with Kundalini, he talks about cosmic consciousness as the next evolutionary step for mankind. And this is one thing that I would say he has in common with a lot of other writers during that time period, the 60s and 70s, when his books are coming out on this subject. A lot of this stuff has been taken up nowadays under the umbrella of futurism. Robert Anton Wilson was also a proponent of this. Timothy Leary talked about this. And this is the idea that with what we are finding out now about consciousness and the evolution of consciousness. And I will say that it starts with an individual realization of consciousness evolution. From that, inferring that this will scale, if you would, to mankind in generally. And once science of course is going to want to study this. They're going to want to know about consciousness evolution and how individuals can enhance their own consciousness. So science will want to follow this, and it will become a part of medicine. And this will lead to everyone evolving. Now, there's Timothy Leary and a lot of people in that camp. Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, I would say is in that camp also. That believe that drugs and chemicals were a part of this. The fact that we had discovered psychedelics in the modern, or rediscovered psychedelics in the modern era, and that these could be taken and experienced in a certain kind of context, and that this leads to consciousness evolution. And so it's easy to go the next step and say, okay, well then we'll have standardized, Sandoz or the big pharma will step in and make psilocybin or LSD en masse, and we'll have therapeutic licensed therapists, and everyone in the world will just evolve towards peace and harmony. And as we can see, that did not happen. So the difference with Gopi is that he's not drug oriented. His idea and that teaching of Kundalini, and it's the teaching of the ancient Chinese Taoist Nidan school, which comes through in Secret of the Golden Flower, teach that this can all be done with the substances that are available to us from great nature and within our body. From great nature meaning directly from the nature that surrounds us. But in either case, he is just as wrong as the Timothy Leary drug camp was. Humanity didn't go that way. I have always been skeptical ideas like that. And maybe it's because of my age. I was Generation X, and my gateway into esoterica was through the dark left-hand path, individualistic realms of Anton LaVey and Michael Aquino. And the world that I came into, even discovering ideas like this, is pretty apparent that is not going to happen. Now, maybe that's just me, because there probably are people out there who believe this, obviously, who subscribe to this idea of cosmic consciousness. And it's not that I'm against it happening en masse. I think it's really unlikely that it's going to happen. And I think that investing a lot of one's personal time and energy in that possibility is in some sense a waste. That time and energy could be better devoted to yourself. And when I read through Secret of the Golden Flower, that's precisely the attitude that I see in there, that here is this teaching that you can unlock a new capacity within yourself. There's no mention of humanity at all, or the future of humanity whatsoever in that whole document. The closest the teacher Lu Dong Bin in that document comes to talking about groups of people and masses of people, as he talks about in the past. And they talk about men of form, or that at some point in the past, society and culture was different because this next step in evolution was simply a part of our regular growth pattern. I used the term second awakening. You could use the term back in the day, real ancient times, like antediluvian, pre-flood, Graham Hancock times. People went through what you might call a second puberty, and that the unlocking of this other capacity and this other chemical distillation process happened, quite naturally. It sounds as occultish and alchemical as it sounds to talk about distillation of inner fluids in the body. When you think about puberty, it doesn't really sound crazy anymore, does it? Doesn't that sound like a rational way of describing puberty? That chemical compounds in the body go through a process of some kind that we don't fully understand, but something unlocks that. Something in DNA says it's time for this change to occur, and this happens in lots of other organic beings. Go through changes like that. The larva to pupa to chrysalis, a butterfly. All of that stuff is different biological, chemical, alchemical changes happening within an individual organic being. So looked at it from that point of view, it's not that bizarre to talk about it. But Gopi Krishna had very high hopes for this. He I want to say at the time that he was writing this, he's 30 or 40 years into his second awakening. And he didn't do anything crazy with it. He lived his life. He improved his life. He became started working. He retired and he's early, and he started working with the community. He started a group in his community. I guess you would call it an activist group. And it was to help people, to help women from being oppressed by the not by the state, but by the traditional marriage customs in India at the time, which were very harsh, which did not allow for any kind of divorce, pregnancy before marriage as grounds for, death, being burned alive, a widow whose husband, his husband passed away, often was burned alive. And he started a community action group to try and change that, which is, that's a noble form of activism, in my opinion. And he wasn't working in government trying to collect taxes for it. He was just independently working with other people in the community, and they would help people on a case-by-case basis. He tells a few stories about this, like a woman would come to them with a issue, and what they would do is just basically help her to get out of the situation. Or if people wanted to get married, this is the other thing he did. The marriage customs were all based on the bride's family paying a huge dowry. And so many, families would go into poverty in order to pay a dowry for their daughter, or else euthanize and, postpartum abortions on females because they can't afford it. So, I would say that's probably one of the main things that he was trying to change. So what they did is they arranged, if people could come to them underground and ask for them to get them a marriage ceremony, a legitimate legal binding marriage ceremony that's outside of the family customs, so they could avoid all of that stuff. So there's very noble social changes and good social changes. But then the other thing is he was working with, he was networking and pushing to have, and India was a very socialist government then, to have the government fund scientific studies of Kundalini awakening, starting with himself. He said, hey, I'm your perfect example. Set up some, he wanted them to set up electrodes and stuff like that, so they could examine him and find, evidence, objective proof that something had happened. So, whatever you think about that, it seems unlikely to me that could have happened. I feel like that has been done quite a few times since then. And I feel, and if you've got a fact-checking vibe in your body, you're gonna want to get me on this. But the way I feel is that there's been lots of studies like that. There's been lots of government, FBI, CIA studies, Project Sunshine, I don't know, stuff like that, where they're trying to study superhuman powers and stuff like that. And either they don't find anything conclusive, or else they find something conclusive but it's not a big deal. Yeah, people can control their heart rate or something like that. But before I get into that, Gopi did find eventually found a group in the government that was going to do this. They planned on doing that. Okay, they put it on the list. We're going to get to doing that, later this year or whatever. And then what happened is they got voted. That party got voted out before they could do and enact the money for the studies or whatever it was going to be. And so and then there's a new group that came in that didn't want to finance that kind of stuff. So it never happened. But he believed very strongly in that's what would happen. Science will see this, and they will surely, the evidence of it will be incontrovertible, and it will spread out to society, and then everyone will just see, oh, well, yeah, if I'm going to get a higher stage of consciousness, well, of course I'm gonna start meditating every day for a year or 2 or 3. And of course, the thing that I think about that is, even if they did prove it, I mean, I don't see how you can actually prove something like that to someone. And the other thing is that people don't care about that. And if someone doesn't care about consciousness, they're not going to be interested in it. For someone to really follow this way, there has to be a little bit of a tinge of disappointment in the way you are now, the way the world is, and how previous ways have failed or proved futile. And this might have to do with the inner attitude that has a sense of conscience in it. This is something also that Ouspensky talked about, that whenever people learn about the possibility of higher states of consciousness, they inevitably start to see an injustice in it. Why can some people become conscious but not everybody? It gets back to a similar argument with that people have about God. If he's all good, then why does he allow bad things to happen to good people? And it's a similar thing. Well, if higher consciousness exists, as potentially exists, then why is it only manifest for a few people and not for everybody? And the answer to that question is, most people aren't interested in it. No one's denied the possibility of a higher state of consciousness, but most people just aren't interested in it. And maybe back in the days of the men of form, where this kind of evolution was a natural occurrence, maybe things were different. But the way things are now, since for some reason we've been cut off from that evolutionary path, extraordinary measures are needed to reactivate it. And those extraordinary measures are the 100 days, which sounds so incredibly simple that people read it and say, oh, that's too good to be true. But then they either assume that for some reason they don't need to do the 100 days because they already have it, or else they tried for a couple of days and decide it's too hard. And that's fine. Not everyone is in a place. Not everyone is in a place for it. But I appreciate Gopi's optimism, whether it ended up being true or not is beside the point. It represents, I feel, his that sincerity and that sense of urgency that he had. Because, I mean, his time also, he looks at the political situation of the world and says, wow, we're on the verge of a total fucking apocalypse here. We're on the verge of World War III. And what I've come to understand is that that's just kind of the natural state of things. That humanity always seems on the verge of like self-destruction. And that's part of the that's not a thing that is there for me to fix. There's a temptation to go out and try and fix that, but really that just gets you pulled into it. That just pulls you into it, and you become part of the machine going that way. But I think that we're meant to take that as a signal that the time is short for myself to take it seriously and to undertake a new quality of efforts towards achieving something. And with that, stay true, go against the grain, and keep the dark fires burning.